All right. Well, welcome back to the Bass Juice Podcast. I'm really excited about today's show because we got Matt Steffen on, professional bass fisherman and fellow content creator. But really, I wanted to talk to Matt about a few different topics because I feel like he's probably an expert in it because he's from that Wisconsin area where there's a lot of different types of grass. You've obviously fished up in the north, in the south. You fished all over the country. And one of your primary weapons, I got to imagine too, is a Texas rig. And, you know, out of all the bass fishing techniques that there is, a Texas rig is probably the most well-known. But also at the same time, you're not hearing a lot of like individual podcasts about a Texas rig, you know, because of the simplicity of the bait. But I wanted to go ahead and talk about it on this one. And so, Matt, one of the first questions that I have for you is really about your soft plastics that you use on a Texas rig. You know, if there's so many different soft plastics that we have, and if you were to pick three, like your favorite ones, the ones that you use the most, which ones would they be? And of course, you got to save the best one for last.
So you want specific names, right? Not just styles. You want the actual baits.
You can give me styles, and then you can tell me like the brands that you use. That's fine too.
Yeah. So I mean, that's one of the great things about the Texas rig is I don't know that there is a plastic bait that you cannot Texas rig. Like
Hmm.
literally, if you want to use swim baits, I mean, you name it, swim baits, lizards, creatures, worms, everything can work. And I think that's one of the reasons it's so versatile and it's been around forever. I mean, the technique is, I don't know when it started, but it's been around a long time. And I don't think you hear people talk about it because it's kind of old and not juicy, right? I mean, it's not the hot new trend, but the reality is it's a fantastic technique. So for me, you know, if I were to break down your Texas rig baits, you know, I think the key really is unpegged versus pegged. But if I'm talking about bait specifically, you know, if I'm flipping heavier grass or something where I've got maybe a heavier weight and I've got a pegged weight, I'd probably be throwing like a Berkeley Pit Boss. A power bait Pit Boss is one of my go-tos in a 3 or 4 inch size. One of my favorite baits to fish unpegged Texas rigs is a Zoom Brush Hog. I
Mm.
love the way it separates. You know, an unpegged Texas rig is, in my eyes, kind of the original free rig. You know, I think now you've got specific weights for that technique, but you can still really achieve that same fall using an unpegged weight. And then last but not least, I'd probably choose a worm, maybe a Berkeley power worm, something kind of old school, maybe a Magnum hit worm, something along those lines where I can take that worm and feather it through the grass, really kind of let it get more down into the grass, swim it through the grass versus more of your creature or cross style baits, which I consider more of a pitching bait into holes or punching through the grass. It's not necessarily the same. I don't think they're as good maybe to swim through the grass. But there is no wrong soft plastic bait to throw on a Texas rig. I really truly believe that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I do think that a lot of anglers spend a little bit too much time thinking about what they want to throw as opposed to just going out there and fishing. And therefore they may miss out on bites because they're so focused on what plastic it needs to be or what color. But one thing that you did mention there that I thought was interesting is you kind of talked about, you know, a pegged weight versus an unpegged weight. And you also talked about the Brush Hog. So why is it that you like the Brush Hog so much on kind of an unpegged weight with your Texas rig?
Yeah, so the brush hog, in my opinion, the way it really is developed is to be a horizontal bait. So when you pull that bait, I like to fish the brush hog on flat terrain, flat contour lines. So generally, it's a little bit shallower, a lightweight. So that's a big bulky bait. A 1/4 ounce weight is actually pretty light for a full size brush hog. But what I like about it is, say, if I'm fishing some, you know, along a grass edge, or maybe there's a lay down tree in the grass, you can pull the bait through that lay down, the weight will separate, and then you get the really good tantalizing horizontal fall of the brush hog, where it's got very good natural movement. You've got a little kicker, you know, and the little twin tail legs that stick out, but the big flappers and the bulkiness of that bait really lets it glide and lets it have very natural movement through the cover that you're fishing, which you achieve because the weight separates, right? So if
Mhm.
the weight separates, the bait actually has the bulk and the mass to have movement, even with the tension of the line. If you left it pegged, you ultimately get a bait that falls vertical. So at that point, I don't think you're achieving the same advantages that you get out of the brush hog. At that point, that's when I prefer to go more with your traditional cross style or beaver style baits.
Okay. So that makes sense. Kind of like the brush hog, for example, like the action that that bait has naturally throughout the water. It's not like you're using it to, just do a reactionary bite like with a pit boss. It's more or less the action that that bait has in itself
Yeah,
is really, like you said, tantalizing for a bass.
yeah. I fish a brush hog really slow. Like as an example, in the river that I live on, or the Mississippi River, if more people are familiar with that, when we have low water conditions, the bass will. So when you have normal water or high water, the bass will push towards the bank or push tight to cover. But in low water conditions, what will happen a lot of times is you'll have the fish will position off the ends of, say, a laydown tree or outside of an eelgrass clump. And it's really just a slow presentation where you'll throw up to that tree, but you're really actually fishing in front of the tree. And it's
Mm,
just like almost like fishing like a Carolina rig is how I would fish it, where I drag it nice and slow, but I know the weight is separated, and that bait is just kind of doing that.
mm,
And to me, it's a really good technique. But the key with that bait is it's the bulkiness of the bait. Like the bait actually has enough mass to not let the line drag it back down to the bottom, and has enough mass to kind of let the weight fall away from it. If I were to try that with just a magnum hitworm or a straight worm, you still get the worm to be pulled down, but the bigger profiled creature style baits tend to work better for that. For me, at least, that's how I like to do it.
yeah. So when you're fishing a brush hog, do you primarily like the bigger ones as well? Like, do you go with the 5 inch? Do you go with this? I mean, they've got big 6 inch version plus.
Yeah,
I would.
so I throw this what they I think they call just the full size or the standard. I
Mhm.
think now they've got 4 or 5 different sizes. So I think it's the 6 inches what it's called. I'd have to go actually look at the bag, but it's just the standard. I think the full size brush hog. I don't know. I know they've got a real big one. That's not the one, but you could do it with that too. I mean, it's really any of your bigger creature style baits, in my eyes, just have the mass to do it. You could probably find some really oversized beavers or something along that line too to do it with, but the brush hog's kind of an old standard for me.
Yeah. Now, something that you said that I thought was really interesting too is you mentioned a Berkeley power worm, and probably like, gosh, got to be one of the most infamous worms out there. I mean, I can remember literally as a 12-year-old, that was like all I fished. A Berkeley power worm, like 7 inch worm. That's all I would fish. I fished it on a spinning rod back in the day because I didn't know how to use bait caster, and I think that with all of the different plastics that we have out here, the different, creature baits, tubes, and, all these baits, I feel like the ribbon tail worm, the straight ribbon tail worm is probably one of the most forgotten baits that you just don't see. Like, you don't see how I can remember one tournament where Charlie Hartley picked up a ribbon tail worm, and it was in yep. Yeah. Yeah. And you may even had the,
Sunrise power worm right there.
yeah, exactly. I think the last tournament I can remember though is Charlie Hartley on the James River. It was a Bassmaster Open, and he won the tournament on a standard 6-7 inch ribbon tail worm. But I mean, when do you like to use a ribbon tail? Most of the time.
So for me, I view it more as a summer bait. I don't really know why specifically, but it's generally for me a post spawn into summer. I really love fishing it on outside weed lines.
Mhm.
Uh, a worm is it's so streamlined that when you're fishing, say, a grass line, you can throw up into the grass and literally swim it out with very little uh, resistance from the grass. So it's a very efficient bait. It really swims down in, and it just gets bit. I mean, there's a reason, they've been around forever. I really think you'd still see a lot of guys doing very well with it, except it kind of goes back to they're just not new and exciting, right? And most anglers like to go to the new items and the exciting things, but there's also a reason that thing is on the shelves in every bait shop you go into, and it's because a lot of people buy them, and they still catch a ton of fish. Um, but yeah, generally speaking, I like to fish them a little bit deeper, more on outside grass lines. and the worm is just really good for coming through that style of cover.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. It's interesting that you had said that because we didn't really talk beforehand, both busy, and I had a specific question about the ribbon tail, so it's pretty cool that you brought that up. Now, one thing, I think a lot of people get distracted by is colors. There's when it comes to soft plastics, there are more colors than we can probably count. But for you, how do you go about your color selection? Is it something you keep pretty simple? Do you like to narrow it down? Like, what do you say about colors when it comes to your Texas rig soft plastics?
So I love colors. Like I love the idea of having all different colors to choose. What I've really tried to work on the last few years, though, is limiting my color selection because you can only carry so much tackle with you.
Mm-hmm.
So, having said that, it's kind of boring. I generally gravitate to your traditional, green. I generally have a green pumpkin, some form of black and blue, and then if I had another color version, it would be something along like a red shad or a purple style color, which to me is a good dirty water and clear water color, but I try to keep it pretty simple. I do with some baits. I like to carry some that have like a hot fluorescent tip tail, either chartreuse or orange generally. But as much as I want to have every color that's available, I try to keep it simple so that I don't have that many options in the boat.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's sometimes the key is not having those options, like you said.
I mean,
If you don't have them, you don't have to decide between when you're out there, and you just
like
pick up what you know works.
yeah, you go to the tackle shop and there's 10 colors of green pumpkin with different flake. And it's like, man, like, do I want purple flake? Do I want blue flake? Do I want black flake, red flake? It's like, I want them all, but the reality is I tend to try to gravitate towards something that keeps it pretty simple.
Yeah. Now, on a side note, this probably is like does not go with what we were just talking about. Keep things simple. Have you seen a time out there on the water where a certain flake in your plastic, whether it's a red flake, a black flake, anything like that, purple flake, blue flake, whatever, gold flake, have you ever seen where having that flake was the difference, where one person was catching a fish, maybe it was you, maybe it was someone else, where that flake was maybe the difference in actually catching fish?
Yeah, unfortunately, I have. Uh, like that's the problem. That's where I want to have everything. But I mean, there's one tournament I recall specifically. So either with the flake or that hot tip tail can make a big difference. But I fished a Bass Open. This is years ago on Douglas Lake, and it was a spawn tournament. You weren't sight fishing, but you knew the fish were kind of up on some rocky ledge type stuff that they were spawning on. And so I was fishing a jig, and I was getting bit, but my co-angler behind me actually was getting probably two bites to the bites that I was getting, throwing a shaky head with just uh, a Zoom trick worm, and he was throwing. So he had watermelon with red flake, okay,
Mm.
and I was throwing a green pumpkin jig, and the like I kind of it was one of those things where I knew he would get more bites doing what he was doing, but the bites that I was getting on the jig were really much better quality. Like we were catching a ton of fish that day. I mean, he was catching a ton of 12 inchers, but when I get bit on a jig, it was like a 2+ pounder.
Mm-hmm.
But we had kind of made a pass through it, and I knew he was catching fish behind me, and I missed a bunch of bites. So I was like, you know what? Let's make another pass. We went and hit another spot, came back, and I was like, I'm going to throw a worm on this case because he was just catching them really fast. Like he was getting more bites than I was comfortable with throwing the jig. And I put a green pumpkin black flake worm on, and we went probably 30 yards, and I think he caught four, and I hadn't had a bite yet. I then
Wow.
put so he was throwing watermelon red. I put a watermelon black flake on. I got one bite to his next like three bites. And then finally I was like, screw it, watermelon red. I put watermelon red on, and I had like the next 10 bites. And I think he may have caught one little one, but it was like all of a sudden I was vacuuming everything
Mm.
based on that watermelon red. And it was one of those things where, so the fish were set up you could, so it was kind of a bluffy bank, but you could see every time there was a little crevice, that's where the fish were sitting. So it was really very specific places.
Hmm.
And I mean, you could see I'd pitch whatever worm in there, and he'd catch a fish behind me. And then as soon as I made that switch, it was like I caught everything going down that bank, and it was just a really clear indication to me that that was what they wanted that day. I mean, maybe we could have found a better color, but at that point, it felt like I got every bite that was possible everywhere you thought that they should be. And I've
Yeah.
seen the same thing happen on rivers here, like especially with smallmouth. Like if you have a chartreuse tip or an orange tip, it changes. Like it just all of a sudden it makes them mad, and you get a lot more bites doing it. It's not always the right thing, but it is something where I've had enough experience over the years where I've seen simple changes in color, which again goes against what I said earlier, where I like to keep it simple. But it's like, man, I don't want to carry 10 trick worms in 10 different colors. Like I just don't have the space for that.
Yeah. No, that's a couple of things that were interesting there is I had the same experience with the exact same color, watermelon red here in Ohio. Fish were the exact same way, kind of moving up to spawn. I was flipping a watermelon red tube, and my buddy was convinced on this day that it was all because of the watermelon red, because he tried 4 or 5 different colors. Same thing, ended up going with a watermelon tube, still wasn't getting the number of bites. And so I do think that there's something to be said, especially maybe in and around that spawn time. And then something that you said that was so interesting to me there too was about those, chartreuse tips. And I actually was fishing on Douglas Lake in a Bassmaster Open. This was in like September of the year. Found some fish way up the river, not way up the rivers, as far as you could get a glass boat up the river at Douglas, and I was flipping a beaver a lot, 3/8 ounce beaver, kind of my go-to, which is a magic crawl swirl color. And I had a co-angler get in my boat, and I'm telling you what, there was 3 or 4 fish that he caught behind me that literally mouthed my bait. Like I felt them pick it up. I go to set and there was nothing. He'd flip back in there after I fished through it and catch the same fish.
Yeah.
And he was fishing a 1/4 ounce with a zoom speed crawl with the tips, chartreuse. And I was sitting there and I'm like, man, maybe it's just a profile. So I switched over everything the exact same as him, 1/4 ounce, green pumpkin, except for I didn't do the chartreuse tips. And the exact same thing continued on, where I would not get the bites. I mean, I watched several times. Like you'd think, come on, Tyler, just do the exact same thing. But it's like, there's a stubbornness about us as fishermen that wants to hold on to it. And I wouldn't go to it. And finally towards the middle of the day, I'm like, the guy's calling and I have like 1 fish in the boat, and I'm like, all right, I switched over and it was immediate. And I think specifically on that day, we were in kind of that September, like late September timeframe, and there was a ton of these tiny shad in the lake. And I was really starting to feel as if the bass, that when you dipped the chartreuse on those crawls, it wasn't necessarily the chartreuse that the bass wanted, but I think when you would be working it in the bait, it looked like 2 little tiny shad just because of the crawls that were in there. And I really felt like I was blown away in that tournament. And that was something, like you said, where I realized, wow, the chartreuse was a humongous deal that I could have easily missed.
Yeah, I think a lot of times as anglers we look at things and from a more of an artistic standpoint, right? Like, why would they want that chartreuse? Like, what could that be doing? But like you just gave a great example where all of a sudden maybe those tails were literally the small shad. Like they didn't care about the rest of the bait. They saw the tails and thought it was a couple of little shad. And, I think the same thing with. So I'm a little with smallmouth. I actually think those hot colors can make them aggressive and mad. Like they don't
Mhm.
like it. But with largemouth, I feel like a lot of times I like to go with the chartreuse. And it's not even, a lot of times I feel like if you buy a bait that has the chartreuse poured in it, the chartreuse is a little aggressive. I
Mhm.
like to a lot of times dip my baits in a chartreuse dye because it's a little bit more toned down. And if you use like with the a darker colored bait, a black bait, it's not chartreuse. It almost turns like that turquoisey color, right? And to me,
Mm.
when I see that, it is the perfect. It like totally matches pumpkin seed tails, like little bluegill tails, where they have that turquoisey look. And I think a lot of times, even though we look at it and we're like, that looks weird, there are little things that the fish can relate that to that is enough that I think can actually generate them to bite. I've got a handful of lakes. One lake in northern Wisconsin here, they call them rosy reds. They're little pink minnows that swim around. They're kind of pink, kind of burgundy almost looking. And they're tiny though. I mean, they're little tiny minnows. I've had experiences with a jerk bait. Like I'll go fishing with my dad. It's a lake we've got a cabin on, and we'll go fishing, and he'll be like, "I'm gonna fish for walleye," and I'll be like, "I'm gonna fish for smallmouth." He'll throw a jerk bait. So one of this, we experienced this years ago, but it happens to this day even. But like we figured it out with the old Rapala X Wrap. Well, I guess they're still made, but the Rapala X Wrap jerk baits come with a feathered tail on it. If you get the gold colored one, it comes with a reddish feathered tail on it, right?
Mm.
And if I threw that one, I would catch literally 10 out of 10 bites would be smallmouth. My dad behind me would throw, I think it was called olive shad. It was silver with a green back and a white feather, straight white feather. He would catch 9 out of 10 walleye behind me. I mean, and this is 15 years of fishing at this point. If we go out there in the fall,
Wow.
I throw that jerk bait, which has that tail that matches the rosy reds, which the smallmouth love, I will catch smallmouth. And he'll be behind me, throwing to the same spots, catching walleye. And it's because they're keying more in on some of the shad that are in that versus the rosy reds. And
Wow.
it's such a clear, it's one thing when it happens once, you're always kind of like, is that really the case? But at this point, it's been 15 years, and we'll joke around, and I'll be like, I'm gonna catch smallmouth. My dad will be like, well, I need a walleye to take home for dinner, and I mean, it's just that clear. And I've had a lot of experiences at this point where that color or that little change can really matter. I mean, I've got a lake, like if you go to the Ozarks have, I don't know what minnows they are, but there's like a very clear, it's like a turquoisey looking minnow, but when you see a ball of them, when they rotate, their back goes from like turquoise to like violet purple. And then when they
Mm.
rotate again, you'll see that color change.
Is that the Brook
And
Silver side?
I don't know. Yeah, there's some sort of silver side looking minnow. I mean, they're kind of longer, but real thin, but they'll be in a tight school.
Yep.
But now if you see, so for years, like there was a color megabass came out with the Elegee bone, which is one of my favorites. And it's like, it's actually this one. Berkeley's got it. They call it shad fillet. And it's this bait. But see how that back goes from purple to blue?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this
Yep.
was this was the color in the Ozarks for a long, long time. It was kind of a really quiet, secret bait. And I had the first FLW tour event I ever fished on Beaver Lake. We started in February. There was kind of like Gunnersville right now. Some of the bays had ice that was forming. The water temp was like 38 degrees. And I went there and I was like, it's all jerk baits. All I'm going to throw at jerk baits. And I had probably 5 rods with different jerk baits. The entire practice period through the tournament, the only jerk bait I ever got bit on was this one. And in practice, I'd catch one, and then I'd rotate all the other rods. I'd give each rod like 20 minutes, right? So I'd never get a bite. Every time I came back to this one, I'd get bit. And I ended up having a good tournament, cashed the check. I was, I think, 40th or something like that.
Wow.
Didn't catch much. I think I only had probably 20 pounds. Like it was one of those events, if you could catch 5 small spotted bass, you were happy. But the
Yeah.
point is, so every time I've gone back to the Ozarks, that's the color that really shines. And it probably was like my third or fourth time back there, where all of a sudden I was in the back of a cove, and the whole cove like went from one color to purple and then changed back. I was like, what the heck? And then I realized it was a ball of those minnows. And I just remember staring at them, being like, that is the exact color like of the back of that bait, like how it rotates. And I swear that's why that color is so good on those lakes right now.
Wow. That's crazy. It's something as a fisherman, it almost annoys me a little bit because to be that in tune, like when you're on a lake all the time, like we all have our home lakes, you pick up on, like you said, the little rosy the
Yeah.
little rosy minnows. Same thing here. Like there's some brook silver sides in the lake that's pretty close. They have that greenish hue that kind of changes in it. But it's almost annoying because, like you said, there are times where we as a fisherman will go through an area and then another angler may come through that area same day within an hour and really catch them well. And it may be like, well, what are you throwing? Oh, it's a jerkbait. But it can get down to what color jerkbait it was. And it may be the difference, like you said, you probably, at least in practice period, I'm sure, of that particular tournament you're talking about with the jerkbait, you probably, fish those jerkbaits fairly evenly and then realize, like, every time I pick up this bait, I get bit. And like for me, like, I could have been fishing the other 4 colors that you had, and you may have never got bit and just thought, no, they're not on a jerkbait, and here you are, like, still able to catch them. So it's something, like I said, it's almost annoying. I still kind of believe that sometimes it's best for you to go out with some of your confidence baits and like find an area where the fish are or a pattern and then really fine tune the colors. But it is crazy how, like you said, there's little things that we may not even necessarily see that the bass pick up on, and it is the reason that you get bit.
Well, and the reality is you're never really going to truly understand that unless you're fishing with somebody else that's either one of you has to be really catching them well compared to the other guy. So that's one reason why I think, if you talk to anglers that fish tournaments, they have those stories where they caught them and a co-angler didn't, or a co-angler caught them and they didn't. And it's really easy to see that, because if you're fishing by yourself, you don't generally have that ability to dial it in that much. But I agree with what you're saying, because I think you really don't dial it into that level unless you're on a body of water you're super familiar with, or you key in on a specific area. Because going back to that first tournament with the jerkbait, I mean, I chose to stay in like I'm gonna say a 5-mile radius around like this one part of the lake that was a popular part. And from that standpoint, it was like I forced myself to do it. And there were 25 other guys that were rotating points with me, and it just really turned into, probably I had the color that was better than the color that they had. It wasn't like I won the tournament, but I know that I attribute that bait specifically, and it's not just that one event. I've gone back basically every time to the Ozarks region. That's it. I have not found a color that outperforms that color yet. And I know part of it is confidence, but a lot of it is experience too. But it's a matter of you gotta fish that body of water enough to be able to test it. And unfortunately, as a tournament angler, I think one of the reasons I revert back to the colors that I have so much confidence in, like a green pumpkin or a black and blue, it's because generally they work everywhere. They may not be the best color, but I know they're going to perform to the point where I'm happy with it.
Yeah, that's good. And that is crazy. Now, we've gotten a little bit off subject with colors, but at the same time, it's all good, juicy stuff. But one thing I wanted to know, bringing it back to Texas rigs, you talked earlier about your experience fishing a jig and your co-angler, fishing a different bait behind you. But when it comes to a jig and a Texas rig, there's a lot of situations out there where we end up throwing those in the same place. So my question really is when did you decide which one is better, the jig versus the Texas rig?
For me, a lot of it comes down to the actual cover that I'm fishing. If I'm fishing grass, generally a Texas rig is a more efficient way to fish. It doesn't mean you won't catch them on a jig. I mean, there are times I like to rip a jig out of the grass too, but generally speaking, it has more to do with, for me, efficiency. A Texas rig is a more efficient bait to fish through grass and that type of cover. If I'm fishing clean bottom, rock, or like lay down specifically, where I'm not really dealing with grass at all, I generally prefer to fish a jig. I think it's a little bit more natural in those types of areas, but generally speaking, that's how I break it down. Now, I will also say there's a few other things from a seasonality standpoint. Like I think a jig is generally better in much colder water than a Texas rig. But or if I'm fishing specifically like a crayfish type pattern for some reason, but generally speaking, it has to do more with the actual cover that I'm fishing. If it's clean, I'd like to fish the jig more. If it's grass related, the Texas rig.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that too. Absolutely. I think at times a Texas rig is going to be a lot more efficient going in and out of that type of cover, like you said. I think sometimes, obviously, it depends on what the bass want. Kind of like what we're saying with color. Like sometimes you do have to just experiment with one or the other. And I do believe too that you're going to get more bites a lot of times on a Texas rig. And sometimes you can get those quality bites on a jig. Sometimes you don't have to use the jig to get the quality bites. They'll still bite the Texas rig. Now, one thing I wanted to ask you too is, like, you briefly mentioned it at the very start, but you said everyone can throw whatever they want on the back of us on a Texas rig, and you had said swim bait. Now, is that something that you have done before? And or kind of with that question, what's something that's fairly unconventional that maybe you have used as far as a soft plastic on a Texas rig that caught them pretty well and that you think most anglers probably wouldn't think about?
Well, I think a swim bait is one thing a lot of anglers, if they're generally, if they're not in Florida or way up north, they don't consider the swim bait a Texas rig bait. But the reality is you throw like a skinny dipper on the back of a Texas rig with, a lighter Texas rig weight on the front, and you've just created like an extremely efficient way to cover grass. You've got a bait that comes through grass really well. You've got a bait that you can actually work as a top water over the top of the grass, similar to like a fishing a horny tone or a toad style bait, which also is actually a really good bait to fish on a heavier Texas rig. Everyone wants to take a toad and fish a toad on the top, and buzz it over the top of grass or lily pads. But I would suggest give a toad, pick up a horny toad or some sort of toad style bait, put a Texas rig on it with a half-ounce weight, and you might be really surprised at how good that can be too. Because it's similar to what I was saying with respect to the Zoom Brush Hog. It's a big, bulky profile bait, and it tends to want to glide more than fall straight vertical because it's got enough mass to stay a little bit more horizontal in the water column. And I've had some amazingly productive days flipping toad style baits around.
Really?
Yeah.
So is that like, is that a, you kind of mentioned how it has bulk like the Brush Hog. Do you flip it primarily unpegged as well, or do you just kind of decide on what the cover options are?
Yeah, no, I generally would rather fish that unpegged. You know how, like, when a lot of people fish it or fish a toad style bait, right? They'll buzz it across the top of grass, and if they hit a hole, they let the bait fall. Well,
Yep.
that's really what you're doing at the same time. If you're just flipping lay down trees, is you're letting the bait fall in that hole in the grass. But what you get is a really good kind of slow bluegill profile bait that separates from the weight and kind of does its own thing on the fall. And it's something that I don't feel like the fish see ever in those areas. So it's a different approach. But I mean, I just started doing it honestly because it was laziness where, I was catching fish in the holes in the grass when I'd stop the bait. And I was just working down the first time I really recall doing well with it. I was working down a bank that had like scattered milfoil clumps, and I was just buzzing down the bank. But every once in a while, you come to like a lay down tree, and I just didn't want to put that down to pick up another rod. So I flipped the frog in and work it like an actual Texas rig through the lay down tree and started catching fish to the point where I found that it was actually really a pretty legitimate bait to do it with.
Yeah. Now that actually brings me to my next question. With a frog, I have used a lot of EWG hooks on the back of it. I also noticed that in your recent tournament that you fished, the dual threat tournament on Okeechobee, I believe you were flipping and punching with an EWG. Is that correct?
That is correct. I am not a straight shank guy.
Okay, so this is great. I wanted to ask you, I mean, obviously, you just said you're not a straight shank guy. I'm almost the opposite. Like, I despise EWGs these days.
Yeah.
So, like, what's your what would you say? Like, what do you love about the EWG?
So so this is something where like the EWG was my absolute go-to bait or go-to hook for Texas rigs and flipping. And then all of a sudden there was the big push to go towards straight shank. Like everyone came out with the big heavy cover straight shank, and the pros were using it, and it was like, all right, I'm gonna try it. So you do your snell knot, you do everything with it. And what I found was that I was missing dramatically more fish on the hook set.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe personally, if you stick a fish with a straight shank, I think you have them, right. You got a big gaff hook, but I found that I was missing a lot of fish on the hook set specifically. Um, and generally, I'm speaking more with like a heavier weight, so like three
Okay.
quarter ounce or heavier, which is when I feel like you heard more people flipping with a straight shank. It really came on more from a punching standpoint, but
Mm-hmm.
I found that I was not getting the same hookup percentage, and I probably did it for a couple of years. And I just was there's a lot of fish I can think of that really cost me like over the years in tournaments. And then I switched back to an EWG style, and I found that I felt like I was back to where I was prior to it. So my personal experience, I was not satisfied with it. What I have since found since then is I've talked to a lot of people that I really consider very good shallow water power fishermen,
Mm-hmm.
and they've all gravitated back to EWG too. So at this point.
Really?
There's still a lot of guys out there that throw straight shank, but I would argue that most of those anglers have always thrown straight shank. So
Mm-hmm.
they haven't really gone back to EWG because they've never really thrown it. So I don't know that they have really experienced both sides. But my personal experience is that the straight shank is not necessarily ideal. And what I would also say is if I'm doing it, I don't like to snell it. I would rather just tie it like a straight Palomar to it.
Okay. So does that mean with your EWG specifically with the heavier weight, do you don't snell it then till you just try straight
I
tight
tie direct
Palomar?
to it. Yep. So
Wow, that's crazy, man. Like you're the professional, 100%. And I almost I almost have the exact opposite take on it. Like if I'm being honest, like I had a couple of tournaments specifically in Florida where I was fishing a big like Zoom Magnum trick worm, and I was using an EWG on it because I wanted a bigger hook because that worm's a little bit bigger. And man, there was like a handful of fish that I missed in that tournament that I missed them on the hook set. Like you almost said the opposite of thing of what I would have said
yeah.
because I feel like when you get them with the EWG, you got them. But I feel like sometimes I have a better hookup with like a straight shank and or like your regular like worm hook. But that just goes to show you there's a lot of fishing things that you will hear. And again, it comes down to people's experiences. What have they experienced? So that's crazy to me.
So, well, number one, you and I both, I think, preach on our channels, confidence is king, right? Like,
Hmm.
just because, like, you're asking for my opinion. It is my opinion. It is what works for me. It's my confidence thing. I am not telling you you should not do it. If you feel more comfortable with it, you should. I would also say that one thing I've recognized is hook set and equipment matter as well with it.
Yeah.
So I tend to be a fast and hard hook setter, right? Like if you're so what I mean by that is when I feel that bite, I'm hitting them and I'm generally hitting them hard. To
Hmm.
me, that matches up better with EWGs versus like if you're more of like you feel the bite, you reel down and you just kind of lean into them.
Hmm.
I think that's probably better for the people that use the straight shank. Now, I don't know, what you would consider yourself as in that category, but I think generally speaking, you're better to pull into the fish with your straight shank versus the EWG. The thing is, I got an itchy trigger finger, like, and for me, I think that falls better with the EWG style stuff. But it also, a lot. Even having said that, your equipment counters that too. So whether you're throwing braid versus fluoro or heavy monofilament, or maybe you've got a rod that's a little bit more action, or moderate action versus faster, extra fast, like all of that, we can change all of that based on the equipment.
Yeah.
So the equipment you use is and your experiences probably line up better for a straight shank. I personally feel like the EWG is better for the way I fish.
Well, that's good. That's. I actually would consider myself a hard hook setter, but the one thing that I definitely have to do is specifically what you said. When I am punching anything over 3/4, you cannot set the hook hard. Like that is the first thing that I learned, and it was in Florida, and I missed, like you wouldn't hook these fish. Like you would get throttled. You know how it is when you punch through a hyacinth mat, a chopped grass mat, and it's punk as soon as it goes through. And you, dude, that got me so jacked. I would set the hook, and you wouldn't even have them for a split second. You would it would be nothing. You'd set the hook, it'd either go in the roof of the mat, or it would just come back at you like 100 miles an hour. And so the one thing I realized when it came to flipping is that I really needed to have a very tight pull hook set, where it's like if I'm flipping a big weight, I'll let it go through. If it bites, like it's almost a weak hook set, pull backwards, and that was the way that I would hook them in a mat specifically. So that's something that I have definitely seen. Now I'd be interested, because when it comes to specifically fishing matted vegetation, I don't think I have ever flipped an EWG, like ever even considered it. So there would be something that I would actually be very interested in testing out now, is going back to the EWG, even though I said I've hated it before, and flip with it, because I don't think I've ever done that. Like I said, big weight flipping. I've done a lot of 1/4 ounce, 3/8 ounce, your typical flipping setups a lot. But when it comes to flipping in a mat or in heavy vegetation, that is something I don't even think I've tied on. And so I'd be very interested to go back, do my regular hook set, and see if I don't hook up with more of those fish.
Yeah, it's definitely kind of a hot topic issue, because I will say when I put those videos out, I had a lot of comments about it. Like, and I had other anglers like actually text me about it and be like, what's your preferred hook for that, or this or that? And it's like, it's obvious to me that there are straight shankers and there are EWG guys, and I guess I don't think either one is like clearly a wrong answer, because when it's not like you're going from three out of 10 fish lands to like 9 out of 10. It's not that big of a difference. Like, I really don't think it's that huge of a thing, which again kind of comes down to, it probably has that 1 or 2 fish it either lost or caught is probably almost more to do with the other equipment you're using with it that fits the fishing style of the angler that's using that equipment. So but it's always interesting. Every time I do a video about EWG versus straight shank, I mean, it's not like forward facing sonar, but you get some people that are like, you're crazy, or that is absolutely the best way to do it. And
that would actually make a great video. Like if I got on a good flipping punch and bite, like have 2 rods set up, exact same baits, weights, everything, but one with an EWG, one with a straight shank, and just like you said, though, it'd probably be hard to tell, because you'd have to probably catch a couple hundred fish over the course of like 10 videos to really see if there is a difference, because in any given day, especially like mat fishing, you're going to lose fish regardless. Like I watched your derby there, and I know that there you had a couple of heartbreakers, man.
Yeah.
And I was pissed for you, by the way. Like, man, those things just need to get in the boat. And it's always why is it always the big one? Like, it's always.
Dude, it's funny, because I mean, I knew in that event I was not getting many bites. Like, nobody was really getting that many bites. Most teams, I should say, weren't. But I felt confident that I'd get 5 to 8 bites a day. And the first day, I think I had 8 keeper bites. But no, the first day I probably had 10 keeper bites, because I lost 2, one really big one, a really nice one, like a 5-pound class fish, and then I got 5 keeper bites day 2. And landed 4, and the one I lost was another 3.5 kind of class fish. And the 2 biggest ones I lost, both of them just had like 1 piece of gator grass, dude, which is like straight vine. And it's like you can't move it, you can't break your bait out of it. It's just, the grass in Florida is mean, and that's all you can do. But it is what it is. I don't attribute that to the hook in either cases. Like, I don't think if it was straight shank or EWG, it would have really made a difference, to be honest. I think it was the gator grass that got me on those 2.
Yeah. Now that actually kind of brings me kind of to the next whole topic I want to talk about, which is grass fishing. But real quick, before we kind of wrap some things up on the Texas rig, I did want to ask you, because we've talked a little bit about pegged and unpegged. And so I just want to ask, like, simple question, like, are you an angler who believes that like most of the time you should leave it unpegged as far as your Texas rig goes?
Yeah. Yeah, I think generally if you can get away with an unpegged weight, you're putting yourself in a better position to get bites.
Yeah.
Uh, Pegging, and this is again, this is kind of one of those hot topic buttons, pegged versus unpegged. But I personally feel like if you can create separation from your weight, your bait to the weight, if there's separation, you get more of a natural fall out of the bait, and generally that helps. I will start pegging as soon as I get to the point where that separation actually hinders me. So if I'm fishing around grass, or maybe it's really bushy laydowns or bushes, that type of stuff where you're flipping and you're finding your weights here, there's a limb here, and your bait's here, like that's where that's actually hindering me, and I'll actually go to pegging it. But if I'm generally fishing lighter, sparser cover, I will always start unpegged and then go to pegged if I feel like I'm not being efficient with the bait presentation.
Yeah, I agree 100%. 100%. Now, again, you're from the northern part of the country. You just fished a tournament in the southern part of the country. But one of the big things that you see across the U.S. and ponds, lakes, rivers is vegetation, is grass. Submergent vegetation, emergent vegetation. I think there's a lot of people that might say like the South or Florida is the home of like grass and vegetation, but I honestly feel like it's probably the North. Like you go up into New York, you go into Michigan, you go, on the northern part, there are so many different types of grasses and different types of vegetation. So this is something I really want to talk to you about because I love fishing vegetation. I feel like in any lake where there is vegetation of some sort present, it a lot of times is going to hold some really quality fish, whether, again, it's emergent or submergent vegetation. So when it comes to grass fishing, do you have a few types of grass that like when that it's on a lake or you see it that you like absolutely stop and fish? Are there a few of your what you would say are favorites? And then are there other grass that you're like, yeah, forget about it?
Yeah, for sure. So my number one is milfoil. Like milfoil to me is kind of the overall best grass that creates the right habitat, generally provides like that aquarium feel where every species in that lake likes to use it. And I don't want to say it's easy to fish, but it generally grows in a manner that makes it easier to fish versus
Mm-hmm.
hydrilla. Like hydrilla, you get these giant blooms and clouds of it that tends to grow to the point where it can get so thick you can't get a bait through it, you can't get a boat through it. Like milfoil gets to the point where it gets really thick and tops out, but as soon as you get under that canopy, it's like beautiful. You have these columns and the fish can swim around very freely. So that's ideally in a grass. Generally, what I'm looking for is something that provides really heavy cover, but allows the fish freedom to swim around in it. So milfoil meets that. Hydrilla can meet that, but generally, I feel like it really is more specific. It's not like I find hydrilla, I find the bass. You have to find the right hydrilla in the right position.
Mm.
Um, I'm a big proponent of so we've got, it's not everywhere, but it is in certain places. Like Gunnersville's got it. We've got a lot up here in the North Country, but it's basically cabbage in a form, but it's a specific cabbage that actually grows with a pink flower on the top of it. I
Mm.
don't know if you've seen it before, but you'll see little patches of it, and generally that so we call it deer tongue, but it's a form of cabbage or pondweed, I guess. But what we call it up in my neck of the woods is deer tongue because it looks kind of spade-like. It's kind of looks like a red cabbage, but it grows in like gravel patches. So like if I see it on the river here or I see it on a lake, I know that it's a hard bottom area, but
Mm.
it's not hard bottom like sand. It's actually gravel. Like it's kind of the type of stuff you'd find like bluegill beds in, where it's got like that pea gravel type field.
Really?
Generally speaking, if you see that, you've got fish in that area, and it generally doesn't grow in giant mats. You usually get like boat-sized patches of it. So if like I'm running down a lake and I'm like I see the pink flowers sticking up, which are generally a little later in summer, I will swing in just to fish that little patch. I mean, that's how
Oh,
good it can be. So that's one I like. You know, if you go to Florida, arrowheads are kind of a big thing because that's something that the bass will spawn on. So in the spring, you could have these giant fields of hay grass and pads, and it's like all of a sudden there's one little patch of, you know, of arrowheads. That can be a good thing. You kind of, a lot of it depends on the region of the country you're in. Like everywhere you go, there's like kind of little variations. But generally speaking, you're always going to have one type of vegetation on a lake that the fish seem to prefer. It may be a different vegetation from lake to lake, but if you can figure out specifically what vegetation they like on that lake, you can key in on that and do pretty well.
yeah. My uncle lives down in Florida, Orlando area, and he taught me at a young age about arrowheads, but they call them down there mother-in-law tongue. Have you heard that?
No, I haven't, but
It's
that
just
makes
funny the names that people have, but they call it mother-in-law tongue, because it's kind of a forked plant that sticks out, which I always thought was really funny. But he taught me that they always grew on a harder bottom, a sand bottom, and therefore the bass, are going to spawn a lot more on that than they would a soot bottom or whatever. But something that I thought was really interesting about what you just said was talking about that cabbage. And I'm not sure if this is the exact same stuff, but I know that in Lake Oneida, the first time that I ever fished Lake Oneida, there was a grass in it that I don't remember it having pink flowers, but it was in like June when I fished. So maybe the
probably
pink flowers,
yeah.
what?
It usually it's more of the pink flowers are more usually like July, August,
Okay.
like later.
But I realized when I went to Oneida for the very first time, I was primarily flipping a tube and a lot of grass. And it's got milfoil. It's got a lot of this like stringy grass. I was kind of catching bass a little bit everywhere, but every time I got to the cabbage, I would be flipping and I'd be catching smallmouth.
Yeah.
And so I don't know when you said that, I never knew that about that. And if it was the same type of cabbage, then it makes sense because we know that smallmouth tend to like rock bottom. Not always, but a lot of times in those type of fisheries, if you kind of have the mix of rock with the grass, you're gonna find a lot of smallmouth. So that would make sense in my mind if that's the same type of stuff. But that's super interesting.
It probably is. It's it's really popular actually with musky anglers too. If you get
Mm,
well, any form of cabbage, but generally the cabbage, the red cabbage, we actually up here call it musky weed because that's what a lot of the musky guys look for. You know, it actually later in the year it'll actually stick. You'll get like just the one little flower sticking out of the water, but it grows in really defined patches. You can get much larger areas, but I like it when you find it much more grouped up in like a boat-sized clump of it. You know, it's grass is one of those things where when you really I agree with what you said about the northern anglers. I feel like it's all of our lakes for the most part have it. Like it's very
mhm.
rare to find a lake that does not have it. Generally, if it is a lake that doesn't have it, it's really dirty or it's more of a river than it is a lake. But like down south, you have grass. I just don't find that you generally have as many different variations. And
Yeah.
up here, I mean, you could go into a bay and literally be like, there's 10 different types of grass right here. And one
Hmm.
lake will be different than the next, you know. And I think one reason I've always done well in Florida is because it feels like I'm fishing back in Wisconsin. I mean, it
Hmm.
really does feel very similar. Like I've got some lakes that I would say are mini Okeechobes around my house. Like, you know, they got a couple of little 10-foot holes in it, but when you look out across it, it looks like a swamp. You know, it's just cattails and bulrushes, and you know, you kind of get a feel for what works and doesn't. And that's the thing too. A lot of times, it's not necessarily the grass type, but it's what does the grass grow in. You know, I know like with respect to buggy whips or bulrushes or whatever you call them in your tules, you know, everyone kind of calls them different things, but they generally grow in hard areas too. And like on Okeechobee, they're not normally the right vegetation early in the year, but as you start getting into, you know, March and April, they become the primary one. But it's because the bluegills will spawn in the buggy whips, like they'll get out in that, and then the bass gravitate more to that. So a lot of it just has to do with what is the bottom competition, what are the forage species using those areas for, and it may rotate from one type to another type to another type throughout the year. And if you can stay on top of it, you can be really successful.
Yeah. Man, you talking about buggy whips and bulrushes again reminds me of my uncle in Florida, because from what I understand, buggy whips have the little tassel on the top of them and bulrushes don't, but they look pretty similar. But I think that they're all, different types of reeds
Yeah,
out there. Now, one of the
round,
big,
yeah, that's what
what'd you
they.
say?
Some people just call them round reeds. Like there's
Yeah, yeah,
different.
yeah.
Yeah,
Round reeds, flat reeds, cattails, there's tons of things. But one thing that, regardless, like you said, up in the north, there can be, like you said, you go into a bay and the whole thing is coated with it. Literally everywhere. And it can be on the bank. You go into Florida, I've been on lakes, I've been on Toho before, where almost half the lake was hydrilla, and then you get up into the shoreline and it's nothing but reeds and kissimmee grass and things like that. And so one of the biggest things I think that most anglers struggle with, including myself at times, is like it's just overwhelming. Like when you see that amount of grass, it can be very overwhelming. So one of the things I wanted to ask you is, what do you do to kind of more or less find grass or find bass in the grass? What is there something specific that you look for in the grass when you get into those situations? What helps you to find them?
yeah. I mean, it is overwhelming, especially when you have 1,000 acres of it, right? Like it's how do you break it down? So I'm generally trying to identify those irregularities in the grass. So maybe you've got contour lines that go through the grass, so you've actually got a depth change. Maybe you've got it's part of the grass where it's more patchy versus solid, and that patchiness is because you've got rock mixed in and the grass doesn't grow as well. You're really trying to find something different to key in on to allow you to break those areas down. And, a lot of times it could just be an outside weed line, an inside weed line. It could be a point in the grass. You got to really try to evaluate what it is that you're doing versus going into that grass mat and just fan casting. If you go into those big mats and fan cast, you may identify pods of fish, but if you can understand why you're getting those bites there, you can generally replicate it faster. The one thing with grass, as much as I love grass, I also it drives me nuts from a tournament standpoint because it can be a very timely thing to break down, right? You actually have to do more fishing, in my opinion, than say graphing around where you can actually see schools of fish. But most of the time, if you find them within a big grass mat, you have found the area where they're going to stay throughout the course of a tournament, at least. And a lot of times it's the right quality fish, too. So it's worth putting the effort in. But a lot of it is really keying in on what to do. I mean, one of my favorite things to do is actually because a lot of the tournaments we fish are more first half of the year, whereas grass is really truly established the second part of the year. Is utilizing like Google Earth and aerial images to understand what grass looks like in
Mhm.
areas where I might be fishing before it's fully mature. If you pull up aerials of like a Gunnersville Lake, you can find aerials that are late or aerial photos that are later in the year where it's like you can see the creek channel literally perfectly go through the grass because everything outside of that creek channel is topped out matted vegetation. So you can understand areas really easily by looking at the aerial photos on places where you do get very thick grass. So that's something that even though I'm there at a different time of year, I can still learn a lot from what the grass will look like later in the year. You can find areas where there's rock just based on the sparseness of the grass and things like that, or stumps. It's very helpful for me. But the key is to try to break it down quick. And generally speaking, I'll also start with lures that allow me to cover water faster. So, like a swim jig's good, your Texas rig, speed worms, things like that, that you can kind of swim and work a little slower if you want. Um, Traps, chatterbaits, anything that is a relatively good bait for vegetation that allows you to cover water quick. And then once you do get a couple of bites, that's when, I'll spend a little bit more time slowing down.
Yeah. And that makes sense. So really big things that you said there, like, always look out for the contours. If you have a ton of grass, contours can be a big deal. A simple drop. Google Earth can be a huge component to more or less not paying attention to a vast majority of the grass and just looking for maybe those areas where the creek channel swings by or help you get a lay of the land, and then covering it pretty fast. So you said you like to start a lot of times with fast moving baits, chatter baits, lipless crankbaits, things like that. That's pretty much how I do it as well a lot of times. But I do feel I just feel like you said it perfectly, that a lot of times in order to find bass in grass, it's about fishing, and really just putting your head down. So with that being said, how long do you give an area, for example, a grass area, before you kind of leave? If you're not, because obviously if you're fishing, it's totally different than graph. You can graph all day, you're going to be able to see schools of fish. But if you are actually fishing, how long do you kind of give a general area before you're like, all right, the bass are not here?
Not much time. Generally, maybe 20 minutes in an area. If I feel like everything is set up right and I'm fishing it efficiently and correctly, I generally like to give it about 20 minutes, because a lot of times you're not looking for an area where you get a bite or two. What you're looking for is an area where you've actually got a school of fish. It's kind of like ledge fishing, right? You got 100 fish that live on a ledge. They do the same thing in grass. It's really important to recognize you could have 1,000-acre grass field, and 90% of the bass in that grass field will be in 1 acre patch. They can get that specific. Actually, it can get so specific. One tip I would definitely recommend to anyone that fishes grass, and we say this a lot as anglers, but you have to, if you catch a fish, throw right back to that same spot. I've had so many experiences where I'll be fishing a milfoil patch, and I've literally won local and regional championships on a lake where I caught 5 fish on 5 flips to the exact same hole in the milfoil. And yet, if I went 3 feet outside of that hole, never got a bite. But the first bite I got, pull the fish out, the next 4 flips to the hole that fish made pulling out of the grass. And I caught 5 fish for 18 pounds. We were done for the day. But we peppered that entire flat. It was probably a milfoil patch that was, I don't know, 100 feet by 30 feet. Not a big patch. It was that one cast that the fish came out of. And I've had so many experiences in grass where it's that way. I had a really good finish on the Harris Chain of Lakes. I think I finished 4th or 5th. And the one day I caught, I think it was 4 of my weight fish on 4 consecutive casts to the exact same spot, and it just is you're literally contacting a school of fish that's in that grass, just like you would be a school of fish out on a ledge. But if you don't make that same cast, you're not going to come in contact. And a lot of times with grass, they don't have the same vision, right? So your bait could land 5 feet off to the side, but if there's a big chunk of milfoil in between them and you, they don't even know your bait's there, or they're not going to ambush your bait or go get it. Whereas maybe if you made a cast 5 feet off on a ledge in clear water, they might go get it because they can see it. Yeah. But it's really critical to understand that, when you're what you're trying to identify in those big grass mats is where there's a good group of fish. And I feel like if you give it 20 minutes or so of good solid fishing in an area and you didn't get bit, I generally tend to leave. And by leave, I'm not saying I go to the other side of the lake. I might just go to a different part of the grass mat, right? Mm-hmm. And give it another 20 minutes there. But after a few hours of doing that, you can cover a lot of water.
Mm-hmm. No, that is something that I feel like I learned really well just a couple of years ago, especially with fishing milfoil that's tall, that 10, 12, it gets 13, 14 foot. It probably gets even more where you are. But I was actually fishing a lake in New York, and I had caught some fish pretty early, was putting together a good little bag, and I was just looking for a big fish area. And I found this perfect little point in the grass, and I went up there and I fished around it, and I did not, I caught one fish, and it was a 4 1/4, 4.5 pounder. So big fish. It was the biggest fish I had caught to that day up until that point. And I kept working down that line and just nothing. And like I actually ended up leaving that area. And then I came back and I'm like, there has got to be fish in this. Like it's the most beautiful, luscious looking grass I'd seen all day, the best looking water. There was a hard stop. I was primarily fishing the edge. And so I had put a waypoint right where I caught that fish. I went right back there to that waypoint. I pitched in, which I assume is almost the exact same spot. I caught like a 3-pounder. And I'm like, huh. And so I literally put the spot lock on and it was the same thing. Like it was back to back to back on the littlest spot ever. And I ended up leaving. I came back later, ended up catching like a 5-something, like a really big fish for the lake. Like I had caught a lot of fish and I was blown away. Like you said, it was in the smallest area. Like it was probably the size of this table where those fish all were. And I was blown away.
It doesn't. I don't know if it's just you make contact where that little group of fish is at that moment, or if there's something very specific that holds that fish right there. But it does seem to be like on lakes that I'm really familiar with up here, there is something special about that, that spot, or where you've caught them. Generally, you catch them pretty close to that area year after year after year. The other tip I'd give with grass too that I think a lot of anglers overlook is the ability to use current to set up the position of the fish. And by current, I'm not talking natural river current generally. I'm talking wind-driven current. So it doesn't take much. If you're fishing along grass edge, a lot of times if you pay attention, you'll see the little particles in the water are going one direction or the other. But if you watch them, if you've got thicker topped out grass specifically, you can see it where it's like the wind will blow those particles to the grass edge and then they hit the edge and they go either left or right because that grass is acting as a barrier and pushing that wind-driven current. So I usually like to fish the upwind side of the grass, and I'll be looking for those key little eddies is what I would refer to it as. So a little point in the grass or a little point where you have an indent in the grass, because the fish will actually sit in those areas and allow that wind-driven current to bring whatever to them. It doesn't take much wind at all. I'm not talking like you need a stiff wind. I mean, on some places like, bigger lakes like in Okeechobee, there's generally a natural current on that lake just based on the lake settling out. If you had a strong wind the day before, the lake will still flush back and you almost always have current. So it's really important to try to identify if there's some current, wind-driven current that will help position where those fish are at as well.
That's super little juicy tip there. Something that's it's so nuanced, but like you said, it can be a huge difference in the number of bites you get if you kind of realize where the eddy is in the grass, if that current, and like you said, it could be very little current, like not even enough at times for your boat to like move with it.
It's not really pushing the boat. But you can see the water movement. You can see, maybe it's little broken off pieces of grass that are just meandering down this way. And, the reality is if those particles in the water are flowing this way, well, what eats those little particles in the water? The bait fish and the small stuff that the bass feed in. And, if there's a way to position where the bait is, the bass are not going to be far behind.
Yeah. Now you have fished grass lakes about as south as you can go and almost about as north as you could go, I'd imagine. Do you think that there's a big difference in between grass fishing in the south versus grass fishing in the north?
Not at all. Actually, it's one of the few things that I feel like is much more of a consistent. You've got, you do have shad in the lakes, which tend to position the bass a little bit differently. But I honestly feel like a lot of the grass fisheries, the bass are feeding in, on bluegill as much as they are on shad in those areas. So like if you've got a shad spawn going on, shad will use the grass a lot of times to spawn. That is where you might have a difference, but most of the rest of the year, I feel like it's pretty similar. The bass are setting up in the grass to either ambush a ball of shad or to ambush some bluegill or a school of perch or something that are going to swim by. And it's probably one of the most consistent things I've seen from north to south. If you're generally speaking, I think it's one reason you see a lot of the northern guys do well on grass lakes wherever they go, and it's because the bass set up pretty similar in grass no matter where you're at. I just
Yeah.
it's a bummer to me because there aren't that many lakes that we fish that are really good grass lakes. I mean, there's a handful, when you look at a place like Gunnersville, but there really aren't that many good grass lakes. Even down in Florida right now, if the FWC gets wind that there's hydrilla somewhere, they get those spray boats out there and they zap it all out. Like I never saw a piece of any real submerged grass on Okeechobee the entire time I was there. There was a little bit of, I think they call it star grass or something. It's like a little bristly bottom grass.
Hmm.
I saw one patch of eelgrass, but I mean, it's not like it used to be where you could go, into an area like the Monkey Box and have thousands and thousands of acres of hydrilla and submerged grass.
Yeah. Now, one thing I wanted to ask, when it comes to grass fishing, let's say besides maybe the forward-facing sonar minnow type style bite, do you feel like if there's grass on a lake, like it primarily, like it can be the winning factor in a lot of tournaments? Like say there's lakes that don't have a ton of grass, but it does have a little bit. Like, are you always going to fish it if you can find it, or are there times where you don't worry about it?
Yeah, I mean, there's times I don't worry about it. There's times it be if it's a lake I've never been to and it's just completely solid grass, there's times I actually have gone away from it because it's more efficient to break down what's not grass than grass. Ideally, I would almost always rather find fish in grass, but again, it's not necessarily the easiest thing to do a lot of times. So, if I will always give it a try, but I tend to veer away more when it's either like really big areas of hydrilla or really big areas of coontail, because coontail kind of does, it's a real bulky thick grass, can be inefficient to fish. It can grow down to 30 feet of water. Like, I mean, we've got lakes up around here that, literally it's down to like 30 feet of water and it'll be 20 feet down. And it's like, you can't fish it real well. The fish are in it, but it's not efficient to fish. So if I feel like it's actually hindering me, I will stay away from it at times. I tend to, when you go to a place like I'm going to Sam Rayburn here in a week. I don't think they've got much for grass right now. Generally you have, the last several times I've been there, it's not like it used to be. You've got one or two creek arms that have grass in it.
Hmm.
I tend to a lot of times stay away from that too, because what happens is, in a 150 boat field, the majority of the field goes and looks at those areas. So it almost becomes overcrowded. So a lot of times I just will completely write that off too. So just because there's grass doesn't mean I'm fishing it. But in some instances, I mean, I always check it generally speaking, but it's got to be like on a place like Rayburn. If I'm not getting a ton of bites and there's a bunch of other boats around, I'll probably stay away from it.
Yeah.
So it's really, you kind of play it by ear.
Hmm.
If I'm on a North Lake in the summer and I see milfoil, I will always check it. Doesn't
Yeah.
mean you find them, but I'm always going to check it.
Yeah. Now this is a real specific question, but you had brought up coontail, and there's a couple lakes near me that have some coontail in it. There's one specific lake that didn't have a lot of grass in it for a number of years, because they kept drawing the water down in the winter, and it would just kill the grass off because they were working on boat ramps, dams, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
But when this lake finally started to grow grass, one of the first grass that grew was coontail. And when it was really patchy, I could go and I could flip it almost like milfoil, but the fish were really like, they were either on the edge, they weren't ever in it. So I have a question, because now it's like the lake has nothing but coontail and it has like a northern hydrilla, like that Elodia in it.
Mhm.
And the thing about it is, like, I have felt that is one of those grass, kind of like you said with hydrilla, that like it gets too thick for bass to even be inside. Where it's like milfoil, if you see it and you're in 13 foot of water, like it could be literally as tight as you can see it, but you can flip right in the middle of it and catch them. So is that your experience with the coontail as well?
Yeah, generally speaking, coontail is one where if I'm fishing it, it's more edge related. You know what I? It's they. again, it depends how it grows, but in a lot of instances, what happens is it'll like get to the surface and then just kind of start going like this, kind of like hydrilla will, where it's a big plume of it, and it'll just spread out as like these big balls. When that happens, I think you get fish that run the edge and kind of use that overhang sometimes as like a shade pocket. But generally speaking, I don't think they're in there just like zipping into the thick of it. Now, I think they can go in it if they want to, but I don't. My personal experience is it's not efficient enough, or I've never found a good enough bite where I'm actually fishing thick in it to spend that much time doing it. I've always been more efficient with it fishing the outside edge of it, where maybe I can see the actual edge of the fold over, and I can punch through that because it's a little thinner. But when it gets thick, I mean, you could throw a 4 ounce weight in it and it won't even go through it sometimes. So generally, yeah, I'm not if you were to ask me like what are my two least favorite grasses, I would actually tell you it's coontail and hydrilla for
Mm.
those reasons. Hydrilla it can be great, don't get me wrong, but it can be very, very inefficient to fish. And
Yeah.
that's the thing. Like I'm talking, my experience with a lot of this is I've got 2.5 days of practice, right? And you go to a lake that's got thousands of acres of it. It's not an efficient use of my time a lot of the time. As much as I would love to only concentrate on it, it can be like searching for the needle in the haystack.
Yeah. And you can sometimes never find that needle. So,
That can happen. A lot of times that can happen.
yeah. So, well, that's awesome, man. I love listening and hearing about grass just because I've just had so many great experiences. I think it's the number one cover for bass. But before I let you go, I did want to ask you a few questions, kind of more industry related, and I'm just popping these on you. But you got to fish the first dual threat tournament, and I just wanted to know real quick, like how did things go with that? Did you enjoy it? Do you like what you're seeing so far? And then also, what do you think about the news that broke really yesterday? Maybe you knew about it beforehand, but this like ultimate tournament, I forget the name of the
Yeah.
company or whoever that's putting it on, but $3 million
It's
purse.
it's interesting how like well, it's like where is this coming from all of a sudden? We're getting these no entry fee, high dollar tournaments, which as an angler, I'm all for. Like I think that's great. It's like with dual threat, there's a lot of people are like, well, that's not sustainable. Where how there's no sponsored out or no sponsors. How are they going to make this last? Blah blah blah. And then like you hear the big announcement yesterday of the 3 million or whatever the full purse, $3 million purse is, and I'm waiting to see if people start criticizing that idea as much as the dual threat one because it's basically the same thing, only even more money.
Yeah.
But as an angler, I would love to see this idea take off because whether it's dual threat or what is the World Bass Championship or something like that, whatever
Yeah.
it's called.
Champions
Um,
tournament.
Personally, I think if they do well, and I think all anglers should want these tournaments to excel. If they do well, in my eyes, it's only going to put pressure on Bassmaster and
Yep.
MLF to improve what they've got, right? Like, how are
Hmm.
these organizations able to start up brand new and offer these huge prizes, no entry fees, and then you've got other organizations that the entry fees are so expensive that you basically are fishing to break even if you cash a check. Like, it'll be interesting to see how all this plays out. So my hope is that these new kind of pop-ups are gonna, shake up the sport, honestly. Like I love it.
Yeah.
My personal experience with dual threat was so I only was able to fish the first event. I missed the second event, and I fished by myself the first event. So I didn't experience the team aspect, but I will tell you, like I still had a blast. I cannot wait to fish with Miles Berghoff, my partner. I think we're going to have an absolute blast. We hope to be able to live stream it all, so people should be able to watch along with us.
Heck yeah.
And it had a really fun, energetic feeling from the anglers where we were there. You take the stress level of the entry fee out, and people are there to have a good time. I mean, it's
Mm.
really truly what happens. It feels like a championship event because you're not putting much on the line. You have travel expense, which is really about it, and the time to be there. From a process standpoint, they improved every day. Like it was a little rough to start, in terms of like how, how the weigh-ins run and all that, but it's a new organization. They haven't done it before. So to me, processes are pretty easy to fix. And based on what they're saying, it's only got bigger and better things in the future. So I'm was very excited to get the invite. I'm very much looking forward to the rest of it, and I hope that it excels. And I will say I've watched a bunch of kind of recap videos at this point, and I've really enjoyed watching them because it's the interaction between the anglers. Whether it's Scott and Hillary Martin, like being able to see the family aspect, which now that I've got two boys, it's like, man, I would love to experience that with them in the future. Or watching, two teammates that are just buddies that are, high-fiving in the boat. Like there's a different energy to them, and I really like that. And I started in my neck of the woods, we really didn't have individual tournaments other than the BFLs. Like everything is team events up here. So I spent 10 years after I graduated college, because we didn't have college fishing. I spent 10 years basically with my best friend and team partner fishing 20 events a year, all over Wisconsin and Minnesota and the upper Midwest. And, that's what our success doing that is what funded my years on the FLW tour before I started to get really good sponsor support. So like I've grown up with the team events. I love the aspect. I think there's a place for it, and I hope, I hope it excels. So when we see stuff pop up like yesterday with this new high dollar championship event, I think the idea is great. I think the fans want it. I think they're missing some anglers, and I'll be curious to get your take on this. I know some people out there think they should be including NPFL. I kind of tend to agree at this point. I think you should probably have maybe the top 10 anglers from that. But I also think they need to bring in some content creators. Like I really think if you're trying to judge the best of the best and you want eyeballs on this, at this point, in my opinion, the reality is the content creators are getting more views and will bring more fans and eyeballs to that event than just the top tournament anglers. I think if you went and got 10 content creators, and I would love to do it. There's a selfish aspect. I don't even think I would necessarily. If you're looking at the biggest content creators out there, I don't know that I would fall into that top 10 category. I think you'd be there. Johnny Schultz could be there, a Milliken, a Brian Latimer, Scott Martin. I get the tactical bassing guys. Like you want to bring views.
Yeah.
Like I think they might be missing a handful of guys.
Yeah. No, and I think you're right. One, two, I would definitely do it. I mean, I love tournament fishing.
I would do it if they give me an invite. I would do it in a heartbeat too.
We would be there.
You guys have bigger followings than I do, so if that's how it's going to be judged, I would understand that. I just think it's a missed opportunity on their part.
Yeah. Well, I agree, and I think I just talked about it in a recent video. It's a huge missed opportunity that Bass is taking their live stream away from their anglers. I think that is. I love Bassmaster, and I've my whole life I wanted to be a Bassmaster Elite Series guy. I think that is one of the dumbest things that they have done. Couldn't make less sense in my mind to do something like that. And I hate to call a company like that dumb, but I just don't think it's a smart move, and I don't think it helps anyone. But anyways, yeah, I think that's something I did notice. There was a couple of content guys that are fishing, the dual threat guys that are also like tournament fishing. But is Perrick fishing the dual threat or yeah. So there's content guys there, and I think that's very smart on their end to do that. But yeah, I also agree. NPFL, maybe a top 20 of each, NPFL, Bassmaster, and MLF, and then 10 content type guys, and you got a 70 boat field, and that's still pretty small that you can do it on that lake that they're doing Old Hickory, I think. So
yeah, I just think right now if if they're looking for the best angler out there and you want the fans to be involved, there's as much or more clamoring for the content creators versus professional anglers as there is MLF versus bass, right?
Hmm.
So if you can get both at the same time and maybe wrap in the NPFL guys, because I'll tell you what, dude, I'll throw my money on Andy Morgan any day. Like,
Hmm.
especially that time of year, like I would love to see some of those guys involved. And this is like one issue I've had with like Major League Fishing the last couple of years is this idea to go from like 80 to 50 boats. I personally don't see the advantage. I know there's probably some financial restrictions there, which is one reason they might be doing it, but they really try to push it as this is good for the anglers, those 50 anglers. For an event like this, to go from, 50 anglers to 70 or 80 anglers, and those additional 20 to 30 anglers are going to bring as many eyeballs or more. Dude, in my opinion, they have the power to do whatever they want. So
Hmm.
invite those guys and you will double your viewership, maybe
Yeah.
even triple. Like that's to me valuable. But it's again, they're hey, those guys are putting the money up. It's their rules. They can do what they want. If they want to make it the top four guys from each league, they can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Pretty crazy though. I mean, I feel like over the last couple of years, you've heard a lot of people say there's no money in bass fishing and all that. And everyone's going to have their own little path. But now seeing some of these guys, like I said, dual threat, seeing this tournament, it's like, all right, like you said, what are we doing, Bassmaster? What are we doing, Major League Fishing? Like, what are we doing to actually help these anglers? Or is it, I mean, obviously they are, they're not nonprofits. They are a for-profit business. So I understand that aspect, but I just think it could all be better.
It does really make you wonder. Like the last several years, I feel like the talk has always been there's no money in bass fishing.
Hmm.
Is there money in bass fishing? It's just being portrayed from the organizations that there's not money in bass fishing and they're
Yeah.
keeping the money, or is it the organization? What it tells me, outside looking in, right? I don't have the connections, but when you see this type of investment from people coming in, it's one of two things. Either there actually is money and they're telling us there's no money, so they're keeping the money from an organizational standpoint. Very much, it could be. I don't know. Could be. Would make some sense. Or the money's there and they're not doing a good job to get it, which
Mm.
means, from a personnel standpoint, they're not being effective at their jobs, and that could be too. I don't know which it is, but it seems like it's probably one of those two things.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. We'd all love for Bassmaster to open up the books and all that, but I know that that's not going to happen.
No.
But it would definitely be interesting to at least know, like you say, what's the cash flow, what's the money, and like you said, is it just they're stuck in a time of doing stuff a certain way, which was fine for a long time. But
No.
now there's these new opportunities showing up, and it doesn't seem like I just thinking the other day, and I did a little chat GPT. Like they still pay. We all know that $100,000 has been like the first place prize for how many years, and I didn't even think about it until just the other day. I'm like, I wonder what the actual what is $100,000 back in 2006 actually today? Because of inflation. And so if they wanted to pay anglers the same amount, it's 160,000. That would be technically the same amount as it was 20 some odd years ago. So it's just the little things like that where it just makes you wonder. It just makes you wonder.
Well, and I mean, that's probably about right. I mean, I think I don't remember. It's basically there's a rule of 81 or something like that where they say money doubles every 11 years, in terms
Mm.
of valuation when you fix in inflation and that type of stuff. I mean, I can tell you when I started my first year on the FLW tour, they raised the entry fee to $4,000, and that was 2011. So that was 16 seasons ago, maybe. And first place was 100 grand. Payouts were better at that point across the board. $10,000 I think was down to It might have been further than 50th place. It might have even been like 75th, or maybe they did 10 to 50th, and then it was 4,000, I think, down to 75th. So it was like half the field, I think, got their money back. But even if you just do a straight relationship between first place and entry fees, first place, so if you were to still look at the FLW Pro Circuit now, which is basically the same tour, entry fees are 5,500. First place is still 4,000. So, from a increase in prices, you're up. I don't. What is that? I mean, that's
Yep.
30% 35.
Hmm.
That's 35% increase. So if you were to, if there was a direct correlation, you should see first place being more than that these days. But and
Yeah.
that's not to mention travel expenses have drastically gone up
Oh yeah.
during that time too. So it's just not favorable, and that's where, again, when these pop-up things happen, like there's that big tournament now that Alabama puts on in the fall. You got to qualify for it, and you got to buy a $500 membership, but if you qualify, it's a free tournament for what, $1 million too. When I see that happen, it's a little disheartening when you hear people get on and talk negatively towards these events. Like, how could they sustain that? Or there's got to be something wrong here. And it's like, as an angler, at least as a tournament angler, we should all want that stuff to, excel and perform well, because if it does, it's just going to rise, everything else. Every other organization will have to step it up in some form or fashion. And at the very
Yeah.
least, it gives the anglers another opportunity to win some money with
Yeah.
very little expenses attached to it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think negativity is a big. I mean, it's generally people latch onto negativity more, but I feel like in fishing, it's like I think that there's kind of this thing that every angler wants to be the best, or thinks that they're the best at fishing, or thinks that you shouldn't get like paid to fish. So when those things happen, there's negativity that comes out of it, and it's just like you said, if people were super positive about it, and obviously there are a lot of people, there's 90,000 people that watch something, and there's 20 people that are actually commenting negative things on it.
Yeah.
But I just feel like like you said, it could raise everything to be at a level that maybe we didn't even think about. I don't think it's ever going to be like a PGA golf type thing. We're not going to have the Nikes of the world, but maybe, like that. It just depends on eyeballs, but still. Yeah.
We'll see how it shakes out. I mean, I, right now we'll start the crusade to get the content creators included in
Yeah.
the world. I should know the name of it at this point, but it's less than
World Enterprise, World Bass Enterprise, or something like that. I know.
WB. I think
I'm
it's
pretty sure Enterprise was in it,
yeah.
but
So
but yeah. Well, cool, man. Well, it's been awesome having you on. This is something I've actually I got your information a long time ago, and I've been wanting to contact you for a while, and finally thought about it the other day. And so glad you jumped on, and hearing that you're going to Sam Rayburn next week. So good luck in that event. Crush it, kill it, get first place.
I appreciate it, man. I appreciate you having me on the show. This was fun. Anytime you want me on, let me know. You
Yeah.
got my info.
All right. Thanks, Matt.